Agatha Raisin and the Woman Who Never Left the Cottage. On a crisp spring morning in Carsely, as Agatha sipped her tea and the village stirred gently to life, an anonymous letter arrived, hinting at a woman who had never left her cottage, and suddenly the calm was shattered, and secrets long buried began to stir. Tell me, where in the world are you listening from tonight? Drop your answer in the comments. I always enjoy learning more about our wonderful community. And do not forget to like and subscribe, it will motivate me for more mysteries every day. Now, let's get cozy and begin tonight's story. Chapter 1, The Unexpected Letter. Agatha Raisin sat by the kitchen window, her favorite china cup warming her palms as the morning sun spilled across the neat little cottage garden. The air was tinged with a faint scent of freshly baked bread drifting from the bakers across the lane, and the distant clatter of a milk cart over cobbled stones added a comforting rhythm to the day. Birds hopped along the low stone wall, chirping as if in careful conversation, while the hedges glistened with the remnants of last night's dew. It was a rare morning of absolute calm, the kind that seemed almost sacred to someone as perpetually curious, and occasionally restless, as Agatha. She took a slow sip of her tea, savoring the delicate bitterness against the sweet sponge cake she had picked up from Mrs. Bloxby's stall the day before. The village of Carsely was waking gently, shutters creaked open, a cat yawned languidly in the sun, and somewhere, a postman whistled tunelessly to himself. Agatha allowed herself a small smile. These quiet moments were treasures, fleeting as they were. For once, there was no looming mystery demanding her attention, no scandal to untangle, no secret to uncover. It felt indulgent, almost decadent, to simply sit and watch life unfold. Her tranquility, however, did not last. The doorbell rang, sharp and insistent, breaking the hush like a sudden clap of thunder. Agatha set down her cup and rose, her mind already flickering with the possibilities of what might be delivered so early in the day. A package, perhaps? Or the postman with the usual heap of bills and advertisements. She opened the door to find a single envelope, unremarkable in size but heavy with a sense of purpose. No return address, no frills, just her name in a neat, careful hand. Curiosity pricked at her like a tiny, persistent needle. She took the letter inside and perched on the edge of her chair, sliding the seal open with deliberate care. Inside, the paper was cream-colored, slightly textured, and smelled faintly of lavender. The words, however, sent a jolt through her morning calm. Some things are best left undisturbed. But the woman never left the cottage. Agatha blinked, her mind ping-ponging between amusement and alarm. Never left the cottage? She murmured aloud, tilting her head as she reread the line. It could be a joke, she reasoned, perhaps some village prankster trying to stir her curiosity. Or worse, it might be gossip, a veiled threat, or a warning she had yet to understand. The phrasing was strange, almost deliberately tantalizing, hinting at a story she did not yet know, a secret tucked away behind closed doors. Her eyes wandered toward the window, toward the cottage in question, its roof gleaming softly in the morning light, the garden orderly and seemingly empty. And yet, the words of the letter whispered possibilities she could not ignore. Who was this woman? Had she really never left, as the letter claimed? And why send this to her, of all people? Agatha felt the familiar spark of intrigue ignite, that tiny flame that always promised adventure, mischief, and the unexpected. She set the letter down and clasped her hands around her tea once more, though it had grown lukewarm. Decisions needed to be made. Dismiss it as nonsense or let curiosity guide her steps. One thing was certain. Her quiet morning, however cozy and pleasant, had ended. Something new had arrived at her doorstep, and Agatha Raisin was never one to resist a mystery, however small or peculiar. With a determined breath, she resolved to uncover the truth, her mind already whirring with possibilities and questions that demanded answers. Agatha tucked the mysterious letter into the pocket of her cardigan and stepped out into the crisp morning air, her boots crunching lightly on the gravel path. The village of Carsely was now fully awake. A baker carried a tray of warm croissants, a child chased a stray dog down the lane, and a group of elderly ladies clustered outside the post office, their chatter a steady hum of gossip. Agatha's mind, however, was only half on these ordinary scenes. The other half circled relentlessly around the cryptic words from the letter. Who was this woman and why had someone written to her specifically? Her first stop was Mrs. Bloxby's general store, a cozy little shop crammed with tins, jars, and curiosities that smelled faintly of lavender and soap. Mrs. Bloxby herself, a woman of keen eyes and endless curiosity, regarded Agatha with a mixture of suspicion and amusement. "Looking for trouble again, Agatha?" she asked lightly, though the twinkle in her eyes suggested she enjoyed the hunt as much as Agatha did. Agatha leaned closer, lowering her voice in mock seriousness. "I need to know about the old cottage on Willow Lane," she said. "The one near the stream. Have you seen anyone there lately?" Mrs. Bloxby's expression flickered with uncertainty. "Ah, the woman who never leaves, you mean?" she said. "Some say she disappeared years ago, left the place to rot. Others swear they've seen a light in the window just last week." She shrugged, leaving Agatha with more questions than answers. The contradiction thrilled Agatha. This was the kind of puzzle she adored, where facts and rumors tangled into an almost irresistible web. From the store, Agatha drifted toward the village cafe, the bell above the door jingling as she entered. The scent of coffee and warm pastries wrapped around her like a comforting hug. She approached a small table where two men were discussing the week's market. "Excuse me," she said, "I'm trying to understand the story of that cottage up Willow Lane. Do you know if it's truly abandoned?" The men exchanged glances. "Abandoned?" one asked, raising an eyebrow. "Not exactly. Sometimes there's someone there. Sometimes there isn't. Nobody can quite agree. Lights flicker in the evenings, chimney smoke rises now and then, but no one's ever sure who, or what, is inside." Agatha's lips curved in a small, amused smile. The vagueness of village knowledge never failed to entertain her, and yet, it stirred a distinct sense of unease. As she left the cafe, Agatha's eyes scanned the familiar path to the cottage. She noted the freshly swept garden paths, the neat lines of hedges, and even the scent of flowers that seemed tended by invisible hands. Smoke curled lazily from the cottage chimney, a subtle proof that someone was indeed present. Windows glimmered in the morning sun, and she caught herself wondering how recently the lights had been on. She began sketching a mental map, cataloging each detail: the angle of the hedges, the position of the gate, the subtle slope of the stream behind the house. With each observation, Agatha's curiosity deepened, but so did her awareness that an investigation, however gentle, could attract attention. If villagers noticed her lingering too often, asking questions or peering around corners, speculation might follow. Still, the thrill of discovery was irresistible. Every conflicting story, every small detail, the smoke, the lights, the tidied paths, added another layer to the enigma, a puzzle that whispered to be solved. By the time she returned to her own cottage, Agatha felt a delicious tension, the mix of anticipation and amusement that always accompanied a new case. The village hummed around her, ordinary and comforting, yet somewhere among its familiar lanes and hedges lay secrets waiting to be unveiled. She set her bag down, her mind already piecing together plans, and allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. The investigation had begun, and even in its earliest moments, the mystery promised to be anything but dull. Chapter 2: Clues in the Garden. Agatha pushed open the narrow gate to the cottage garden, the rusted hinges groaning in protest as if warning her to turn back. The path beyond was choked with overgrown weeds, brambles curling into twisted patterns that seemed almost deliberate, as though nature itself were guarding the house. The hedges were thick and uneven, their edges jagged from neglect, yet a faint sense of order lingered. Someone had been tending the garden, albeit in secret. She stepped cautiously along the gravel path, her eyes scanning each foot of earth for the slightest anomaly, the faintest clue. The morning air was cool, scented faintly with damp soil and the lingering aroma of wildflowers. Agatha's sharp eyes caught a broken fence post, its wood splintered and rotted, leaning toward the path as if hinting at a hasty exit or entry. A squirrel darted across her path, pausing to eye her with mild suspicion before vanishing into the thicket. Birds flitted noisily through the overhanging branches, their movement breaking the shadows into dancing patterns that added both charm and eeriness to the garden. Every detail, every crack in the stone edging, every uneven blade of grass, was catalogued in her mind like pieces of a puzzle. Her attention was drawn to faint depressions in the soil, subtle indentations in the soft earth that suggested footprints. They were small, almost delicate, and yet their presence set her pulse a little faster. Someone had been here recently, and the idea thrilled Agatha as much as it unsettled her. She knelt carefully, brushing loose dirt from one print, noting the angle and depth. These footprints weren't old. The soil was still slightly damp from the morning dew, imprinting shapes that whispered stories of movement, arrival, and departure. Near the foot of a tangled rose bush, she noticed a glimmer of metal partially hidden under the leaves. Her fingers trembled slightly as she unearthed it. A small cameo locket, the delicate oval framed with ornate gold filigree. The portrait inside was of a woman she did not recognize, her features pale and dignified, eyes cast downward as though hiding a secret. Agatha turned it over, finding no inscriptions, only the faint weight of mystery pressing in her palm. Whoever had left it behind had intended it to be found, or perhaps it had slipped unnoticed from its owner's possession. Either way, the locket was a clue, a tiny, tantalizing fragment of a story waiting to be discovered. Agatha stood, holding the locket and scanning the garden once more. Broken branches, trampled flower beds, and the path leading to the back gate all hinted at movement, perhaps a visitor or even a resident who preferred secrecy. She allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. The puzzle was taking shape, piece by piece. Each neglected flower, each uneven hedge, each mark in the soil whispered hints about a life hidden behind the cottage walls. As she wandered further, mapping the garden in her mind, Agatha considered who might benefit from secrecy. The letters, the stories, the footprints, they all suggested someone with a reason to hide, someone entwined with the village's past yet determined to remain unseen. Her curiosity flared like a small, contained fire, warm and insistent, urging her onward. She could almost hear the garden whispering, teasing her with the promise of discovery, and she was eager to follow its secretive trail wherever it led. By the time Agatha returned to the front path, the cameo carefully stowed in her pocket, she felt a thrill of anticipation. The cottage was no longer simply an old, empty house. It had become a living puzzle, full of hidden signs and subtle messages. And somewhere within its garden and walls, someone, perhaps the woman who had never left, was waiting, unaware that Agatha Raisin was beginning to unravel the secrets left behind. Agatha circled the cottage slowly, her eyes tracing the familiar lines of the stone walls, the steeply pitched roof, and the small dormer windows that punctuated its upper floor. From the garden path, everything looked quaint and ordinary, yet her instincts, sharpened by years of curiosity and occasional misadventure, told her that appearances were deceptive. She stopped abruptly in front of one particular window on the ground floor, noting the subtle smudge marks that marred the otherwise clean glass. Fingers had pressed against it. Someone had been there recently. The thought sent a shiver up her spine, not unpleasant, but tinged with excitement. Agatha crouched slightly to study the marks, her fingers hovering over the sill as if she could detect more from a closer inspection. The smudges were faint yet deliberate, not the accidental trace of a bird or passing wind. Her mind began spinning through possibilities. Could it be the woman who never left the cottage, reaching out toward the world she had abandoned? Or perhaps an intruder hiding in plain sight, making use of the cottage's secrets for some unknown purpose? The ambiguity thrilled her, making every shadow seem charged with significance. A soft creak interrupted her thoughts, the sound of floorboards bending somewhere inside the house. Agatha froze, her ears straining, listening. A faint humming followed, steady and low, as if a melody were being whispered in the privacy of the cottage walls. Her pulse quickened slightly. Whoever was inside was alive and active. This was no abandoned house, no decaying relic forgotten by the village. It was inhabited, and whoever resided there had chosen secrecy, or perhaps solitude, with a clear purpose. Agatha straightened, weighing her options. She could attempt entry now, try the door, or even test the window herself, but the risk seemed unwise. The cottage had already demonstrated that it was more than a simple garden and stone walls. Someone inside might be watching, waiting, or even prepared to act should an intruder appear. No, she decided, this was not a moment for rash decisions. Patience, observation, and strategy were far better tools than impulsive curiosity. Her eyes scanned the cottage exterior, cataloging every feature she could see from a safe distance. The creeping ivy that climbed one corner of the wall, the worn path leading toward the back gate, the moss collecting between roof tiles. Each detail added context, helping her understand the rhythms of the house and its occupant without risking direct confrontation. She pictured herself returning at dusk or perhaps later at night, when shadows and subtle light could give her a better sense of movement within. Still, the locked window remained a puzzle, its presence unnerving and tantalizing. Why lock a window when someone clearly remained inside? Was it protection, privacy, or something more? Agatha found herself speculating wildly, imagining scenarios in which secrets were hidden, messages were passed through whispered words and small movements, and the woman herself remained as enigmatic as the letter that had first summoned her curiosity. Finally, she stepped back, brushing a stray leaf from her coat. A plan was forming in her mind, a careful observation post, a quiet vigil that would allow her to watch, note, and understand without alarming the occupant. The soft hums, the floorboard creaks, the locked window, they were all pieces of a story she intended to unravel, one patient step at a time. With a measured breath, she allowed herself a small, almost mischievous smile. The cottage had revealed its first real secret, and Agatha Raisin was more determined than ever to uncover the rest, armed with caution, patience, and her characteristic curiosity. Chapter 3: The First Night's Stakeout. The evening air settled over Carsely like a soft, cool blanket, tinged with the scent of wood smoke and damp earth. Agatha Raisin crouched behind a neatly trimmed holly bush in her neighbor's garden, binoculars pressed to her eyes, a notebook balanced precariously on her knee. Her own cottage was just a short distance away, but tonight she had chosen a vantage point that allowed a clear line of sight to the mysterious Willow Lane cottage without drawing attention. Every sense was alert, every sound magnified. The distant bark of a dog, the gentle rustle of leaves in the breeze, the occasional chime of the village clock striking 6. Inside the cottage, warm light spilled from the windows, golden and inviting. Yet movement within was erratic and unpredictable. Shadows flickered across the curtains, sometimes long and sinuous, sometimes abrupt, as if someone were pacing or gesturing. Agatha jotted notes feverishly, drawing small sketches of the windows and marking each shift in light. She imagined countless scenarios: a solitary woman rehearsing for some secret meeting, a visitor arriving unexpectedly, or a long-lost relative hiding from prying eyes. Each possibility teased her mind, urging her to think, guess, and anticipate. Her concentration wavered only briefly when a sudden sneeze betrayed her presence. She clutched the binoculars, pressing them closer to her face, but the sound had already echoed into the quiet night. "Blast it," she whispered, "not now." She ducked lower, tucking her legs beneath her like a schoolgirl caught in mischief, and took a deep, calming breath. Her notebook remained open, lines and sketches sprawling chaotically as she tried to suppress a grin at her own fumbling. A twig snapped beneath her heel as she shifted, and she winced at the sharp sound. The shadows inside the cottage seemed to pause as if acknowledging her presence, then resumed their restless dance. From within came a muffled conversation, low and indistinct, but distinctly human. Agatha leaned forward, straining to catch a word or phrase, only to be thwarted by the wind carrying the syllables away. Her pulse quickened. The cottage was alive, its inhabitants' movements deliberate, measured, and yet unpredictable enough to keep a careful observer guessing. Despite the tension, she allowed herself small bursts of humor. Her crouched posture was uncomfortable, her notes increasingly illegible, and the occasional sneeze or rustle of leaves had her imagining she must look positively ridiculous to anyone who might happen to glance her way. Still, she reminded herself of the stakes: knowledge, understanding, and the thrill of uncovering a story hidden in plain sight. Each flicker of light, each sway of shadow, was a revelation in miniature, a piece of a puzzle waiting to be assembled. Hours seemed to stretch and compress simultaneously. Agatha's eyes, sharp from the strain of watching, caught every detail: a hand briefly pressed to a curtain, a foot crossing the room in silhouette, a soft glow of lamplight shifting from one side of the cottage to another. The ordinary became extraordinary, mundane gestures charged with mystery. Her notebook was filling, lines and arrows connecting observations to theories, questions and possibilities. Finally, as dusk deepened into night, Agatha allowed herself a slow exhale. She had survived the first watch, learned more than she expected and confirmed that someone, without a doubt, was inhabiting the cottage. The shadows had secrets and she had glimpsed them. She rose carefully, brushing twigs from her clothing, and prepared to retreat, her mind already planning her next observation. Her heart still thrummed with excitement and amusement. The night was far from over, and the game of shadows had only just begun. The night had settled into a deep, almost velvety darkness, broken only by the occasional glimmer of the village street lamps casting long thin shadows across the gardens. Agatha Raisin crouched just beyond the holly hedge, her notebook open, pen poised, and every sense straining toward the cottage on Willow Lane. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of wet earth and the distant tang of smoke from neighboring chimneys. She adjusted her position slightly, careful not to disturb the delicate balance between concealment and observation. It began subtly, a soft murmur barely audible over the evening breeze. Agatha's head tilted, ears straining. She recognized it instantly as a human voice, yet its tone was peculiar, hesitant, trembling, almost apologetic. The words were fragmented at first, phrases carried away by the wind, but gradually she caught more. Shouldn't have left things undone, forgive. The cadence of the whisper suggested both fear and regret, the speaker speaking to someone, or perhaps to themselves, about events that had left lingering scars. Agatha's pen moved quickly across her notebook, jotting down the snippets she could catch. Her mind raced, filling gaps with possibilities, weighing each phrase against what she already knew about the cottage from villagers' rumors. Some details aligned, others did not. She noted the inconsistencies carefully, curious why the spoken account diverged from the stories she had collected. A secret history was unfolding in real time before her eyes, one that had been hidden behind the walls and windows of the cottage for years. Her attention sharpened as she observed movement through the partially drawn curtains. A shadow passed briefly, a figure bending or moving across the room, though its precise actions remained elusive. Agatha's pulse quickened. The whispers hinted at betrayal, at long-held regrets, at a story that had been carefully concealed from everyone around. Every sound seemed deliberate, every shift of shadow meaningful, as if the occupant were aware of being observed without truly revealing themselves. She leaned closer, careful not to disturb the undergrowth beneath her. "Patience," she whispered to herself, a small smile playing at her lips. "Rushing will ruin everything." The thrill of eavesdropping, tempered by caution, brought a peculiar mix of excitement and tension. Her mind began drafting strategies, where she might position herself for a better view, how to approach the cottage without alarming the inhabitant, and which details would be most revealing once she could enter. Then, abruptly, a sudden movement caught her off guard. A more defined shadow, taller than she had anticipated, slipped across a window, casting itself against the pale curtain. Agatha jerked back instinctively, her heart leaping. Her notebook tipped slightly and she caught it just before it fell. The shadow disappeared as swiftly as it had appeared, leaving only the faint sound of shifting furniture behind it. Her pulse slowed gradually, replaced by renewed determination. The presence of someone active inside confirmed her suspicions. This was no empty house, no forgotten relic. There were lives and perhaps secrets still very much alive within. Agatha allowed herself a slow, deep breath, clutching her notebook to her chest. The whispers had offered a tantalizing glimpse of the past, a thread she intended to follow with patience and precision. Her plan was already forming: careful observation, discreet investigation and cautious engagement. Every creak, every murmur, every shadow was a clue, and she would unravel them all. The night stretched on, quiet yet charged, carrying a promise of discovery that she could not resist. By the time she retreated to the shelter of her vantage point's shadows, Agatha felt a thrill of anticipation she had not experienced in weeks. The cottage was alive, secretive, and undeniably compelling. Her notebook was filled with half-heard words, sketches of shadows, and fleeting impressions, all pieces of a puzzle she was determined to solve. With each whispered syllable, her curiosity grew, and her resolve solidified. The mystery of the woman who never left the cottage would not remain hidden for long. Chapter 4. Uncovering the Past. Agatha eased the back door open, careful not to disturb the loose hinges, and stepped into the dim interior of the Willow Lane cottage. Dust motes floated lazily in the weak shaft of light from the small window above the sink. The air smelled faintly of old paper, lavender, and something else she couldn't immediately identify, a lingering hint of melancholy, perhaps, or the subtle residue of memories long kept hidden. She set her bag down and allowed her eyes to adjust, scanning the room for anything that might provide insight into its secretive occupant. A battered writing desk drew her attention first. Its surface was strewn with envelopes yellowed at the edges, stacks of diaries bound in faded leather, and a scattering of photographs that had long lost their crisp clarity. Agatha reached for the nearest diary, the leather cool beneath her fingers. She opened it carefully, her eyes sweeping the neat, tight handwriting that chronicled days, months, and years of a life largely confined within these walls. The entries began mundanely, detailing routine meals and household chores, but soon took a darker, more poignant turn. Mentions of friends lost, invitations ignored, letters unanswered, and a sense of growing isolation. Between the pages of the diary, Agatha discovered loose letters, sealed with faded wax stamps, their contents partially hidden beneath careful folds. She unfolded one slowly, noting the trembling script. It spoke of family estrangement, of trust betrayed, and of someone who had once held the woman in high regard now turning coldly away. There were hints of blackmail, threats disguised as concern, and a pervasive fear that had settled like a shadow over the writer's life. Agatha's fingers lingered on the paper. Each sentence painted a picture of a recluse forced into seclusion not by choice, but by circumstance and manipulation. Photographs offered another dimension to the story. Agatha examined portraits of a young woman, elegant and poised, with eyes that mirrored the sadness and dignity she had glimpsed in the diary entries. There were family gatherings from decades past, faces she recognized from the village, though their expressions seemed stiff and distant, hinting at unspoken tension. In one image, a man's hand rested lightly on the woman's shoulder, yet the eyes in the photograph suggested disapproval rather than affection. Agatha carefully made mental notes, connecting these visual clues with the fragments of narrative she had already uncovered. Each discovery added layers to her understanding. The woman who had never left the cottage was no eccentric without reason, nor a figure of idle gossip. She had been shaped by tragedy, forced into solitude by betrayal and circumstance, and yet her life remained intertwined with the broader village community. Agatha felt a swell of empathy. This was a person who had suffered quietly, whose resilience had preserved her existence despite fear and isolation. Even as her heart softened toward the recluse, Agatha's curiosity deepened. Each diary entry, each letter, hinted at additional secrets. Small betrayals, concealed motivations, and connections to families and individuals whose names she recognized from earlier inquiries. The cottage held more than memories, it held puzzles waiting for careful unraveling. She realized that understanding the woman's past might illuminate the present mysteries she had begun to observe. The footsteps, the humming, the locked windows. Agatha carefully replaced the diary and letters, her mind buzzing with fragments of stories, names, and events. The woman's life, once hidden in shadows, was slowly revealing itself, piece by piece. Agatha's pulse quickened not only with anticipation but with a growing determination. This was a mystery worth pursuing with care and respect. Somewhere within these walls lay the keys to understanding not just a solitary life, but the tangled web of secrets that bound the village together, and Agatha Raisin intended to follow every thread. Agatha's curiosity led her toward the large bookshelf lining one wall of the study, the spines of countless volumes gleaming dully in the muted light. Her fingers traced the edges of the shelves almost absent-mindedly until a faint draft brushed against her cheek. Pausing, she pressed lightly on the central panel of the bookshelf, and it shifted. A soft click echoed through the room. Heart quickening, she pushed again, and the entire section swung inward, revealing a narrow doorway concealed behind the rows of books. The hidden room smelled of aged paper, dust, and faint perfume, an intimate, secretive space that had clearly been untouched for years, yet preserved with deliberate care. Agatha stepped inside, eyes wide. Every surface was meticulously organized, shelves lined with personal journals, boxes of photographs carefully labeled, and files tied with ribbon. On the desk lay an assortment of old newspaper clippings, their headlines yellowed but legible, detailing events from decades past. Maps of the village and surrounding countryside were pinned to the walls, annotated in pencil with tiny, precise handwriting. Each corner of the room exuded intent. This was no casual hiding place but a vault of secrets, maintained with patience and purpose. She moved carefully among the objects, lifting a newspaper clipping that chronicled a local scandal from years ago. Her pulse quickened as she realized these were not merely innocuous records. The articles hinted at a crime that had never been fully resolved. Names she recognized from her earlier inquiries appeared repeatedly, each mention shadowed with innuendo or subtle accusation. Agatha's eyes flicked toward a stack of notes, cryptic in nature. Lines of shorthand, sketches, and coded annotations that suggested someone had been tracking events meticulously, connecting dots only they fully understood. Among the scattered papers, a small leather-bound notebook caught her attention. Its pages contained lists of observations, people, dates, odd behaviors, and fragments of conversations. The woman who had lived here, or perhaps still did, had been planning and recording events with extraordinary care. Agatha could sense a mind intent on control, vigilance, and secrecy, a mind that had chosen to isolate itself from the village yet remained intimately connected through observation and notes. Despite a shiver of unease, Agatha felt a rush of exhilaration. The hidden room elevated the mystery to a new level. This was no quaint recluse keeping a few diaries. This was someone deeply involved in the shadows of village life, someone who had witnessed, remembered, and perhaps even manipulated events long forgotten by the casual observer. The implications were both thrilling and dangerous. She took careful notes of her own, sketching the layout and jotting impressions, aware that even a single misplaced detail could reveal too much if discovered. The room demanded respect and discretion, yet it also offered the tantalizing promise of answers. Agatha's mind buzzed with questions. What crime had been hidden? Who was involved? And why had this woman, apparently isolated, amassed such detailed records? Each unanswered question pulled her forward, the danger sharpening her senses and fueling her determination. As she quietly closed the secret door behind her, Agatha felt a mix of apprehension and excitement. The cottage, its occupant, and now this hidden room had revealed only part of the story. There were still layers to uncover, threads to follow, and secrets waiting to be brought to light. And Agatha Raisin, as ever, intended to unravel them all. Chapter 5. Secrets and Suspicions. Agatha sat in the corner of her favorite armchair, a cup of steaming tea warming her hands, while her trusted friend, Mary, perched across from her with an expression of polite curiosity. Agatha had decided to share just enough of her discoveries to gauge reaction without revealing every detail of the hidden room. She described the diaries, the letters, and the cryptic notes, watching Mary's eyes widen in both intrigue and concern. So you're telling me someone's been keeping meticulous records of village life, and perhaps crimes? Mary asked, leaning forward. Yes, Agatha replied, nodding slowly. And the strangest part is how it all ties to families we know. Names pop up repeatedly, little incidents that seemed minor at the time, but now I wonder if they were never as innocent as they appeared. Her voice lowered, as though speaking too loudly might allow the cottage's secrets to drift across the air and back to the hidden occupant. Mary raised an eyebrow, a faint smile tugging at her lips. You always did have a knack for finding trouble, Agatha. But this is something else entirely. She paused, tapping her fingers against the edge of her teacup. I suppose you're considering motives and opportunities. Who might gain from secrecy? Who benefits if this woman, or her records, remain hidden? Agatha scribbled a few notes in her own journal, connecting names and incidents she had observed or heard about. She imagined different scenarios, grudges held over years, rivalries that had simmered beneath polite smiles, even hints of long-forgotten disputes that could have escalated quietly into manipulation. Villagers had always been opinionated, and she knew gossip could reveal as much truth as it concealed. The conversation took a lighter turn as Mary offered her own theories. Some were whimsical, ghostly visitors, secret romances, or a hidden treasure. But each suggestion contained an element of plausibility that Agatha noted with professional interest. Even the mundane gossip, the argument over a fence line, the disappearance of a family heirloom, or the late-night footsteps behind shuttered windows, suddenly gained significance. The village, with its quaint streets and cheerful facades, became a stage for mystery, every resident a potential actor in a drama long unfolding in secret. Yet, as Agatha returned home that evening, she became aware of subtle signs that her investigation had not gone unnoticed. A small envelope rested on her doorstep, its contents cryptic. A single note reading, "Curiosity has its price." Inside she found a tiny polished pebble painted black, placed with deliberate care on her kitchen counter. Nothing overtly threatening, but the implication was clear. Someone knew she was probing the cottage's secrets, and this quiet warning served as both intrigue and caution. Agatha examined her surroundings with renewed vigilance. Books shifted slightly on the shelves, a chair seemed to have been nudged, and a faint scent of lavender lingered in the hallway. Each small anomaly heightened her awareness and excitement. She realized that the mystery was no longer confined to the cottage. It had reached her doorstep in the most literal sense. Sitting back in her armchair, notebook open and pen poised, Agatha allowed herself a wry smile. The village had theories, she had evidence, and someone somewhere was watching. The game of secrets and suspicions was escalating, and she was determined to remain one step ahead, unraveling the threads of truth with the careful curiosity that had always defined her investigations. Agatha Raisin had just settled under a thick woolen blanket with her notebook balanced on her knees when a sharp knock at the door jolted her upright. The clock on the mantel ticked past 11, and her heart skipped a beat. Visitors at this hour were rare in Carsely and rarely welcome. She straightened her robe, smoothed her hair, and tiptoed to the door, peering through the peephole. A figure stood in the shadows, silhouetted by the faint light of a nearby street lamp. The stranger wore a dark coat pulled tightly around them and a wide-brimmed hat that obscured their face. Agatha hesitated, curiosity warring with caution. "Who's there?" she called, her voice steadier than she felt. "Agatha Raisin," a low, measured voice replied. "I wouldn't open the Willow Lane cottage if I were you." The words carried a weight of urgency and subtle threat, yet there was a strange rhythm, almost theatrical in its delivery. Agatha's brow arched. "And why is that? Are you here to lecture me or merely to scare me for sport?" The stranger shifted slightly, leaning closer, the brim of the hat catching the moonlight just enough to reveal a glinting eye. "Not sport," they said. "Information. The woman you seek, her past is tangled. Danger follows her secrets. Some things were never meant to be uncovered." The figure's tone implied more than it revealed, a puzzle wrapped in shadow and hint. Agatha's mind raced, trying to parse the meaning while maintaining composure. She crossed her arms, tilting her head with a wry smile she hoped conveyed amusement rather than fear. "Well, I do so enjoy a puzzle," she replied lightly. "But if you're here to frighten me, I warn you, I have nerves of steel and a rather sharp tongue." The stranger chuckled softly, an unexpected sound that broke the tension, yet the weight of their warning remained. "Steel and wit may not save you," the figure murmured. "Just be cautious. Watch your back. Secrets have teeth." And just as suddenly as they had appeared, the stranger turned, their coat swishing softly against the cobblestones, and vanished down the lane. Agatha blinked, momentarily uncertain if she had imagined the encounter. She pressed her ear to the door, hearing nothing but the wind rustling through the hedges. Inside, she leaned against the doorframe, heart still racing but tempered by exhilaration. She muttered to herself, half amused, half exasperated, "Well, that's one way to deliver a warning. Couldn't simply leave a note, could they?" Her mind replayed the cryptic phrases over and over. Danger follows her secrets. Secrets have teeth. The language was theatrical, cryptic, yet undeniably purposeful. Someone, unknown, cautious, and strangely invested, had taken the time to ensure she understood that her investigation carried risk. Agatha returned to her armchair, notebook open once more, jotting down every word she remembered. Her pulse steadied, replaced by a familiar thrill, the excitement of danger mingling with discovery, curiosity, and the faint, comforting humor of her own internal commentary. The late-night visitor had vanished, but the questions they left behind lingered, sharper and more compelling than any clue she had uncovered so far. The game had shifted. The stakes had risen. And Agatha Raisin, as ever, was ready to meet the challenge, notebook in hand and mind alight with curiosity, courage, and a touch of wry amusement. Chapter 6. Confrontations and Revelations. The door to the Willow Lane cottage creaked softly as Agatha pushed it open, stepping into the familiar scent of aged paper, lavender, and faint smoke. She had rehearsed her introduction countless times in her head, but now, faced with the reality of the woman herself, every rehearsed word seemed fragile and inadequate. The cottage was dimly lit, shadows stretching across the walls, creating the impression of a world carefully curated yet guarded. A figure emerged from the far side of the room. The woman was slight, her posture rigid, yet there was an undeniable presence about her. Dark hair framed a pale face, and eyes that had clearly endured sorrow and vigilance regarded Agatha with quiet wariness. "You've come," she said softly, voice calm but edged with tension. Agatha inclined her head, offering her trademark mixture of warmth and mild amusement. "I have. I suppose you were expecting me eventually." The woman's lips twitched, almost a smile, though it did not reach her eyes. "I expected curiosity," she admitted. "Not persistence." Agatha stepped further into the room, careful to respect the invisible boundary that seemed to radiate from the recluse. Every movement was measured, deliberate. She noted small details, the slight tremor in the woman's hands, the way her gaze flicked to the dusty diaries on the desk, the faint scar along her wrist that told stories unspoken. "I wanted to understand," Agatha began gently, her tone conveying both respect and subtle humor. "To know why someone would choose isolation. Why a cottage, a garden, a hidden room instead of the village we all know." The woman's eyes softened briefly, revealing the weight of years spent in careful seclusion. "I sought protection," she said quietly. "From shame. From fear. From the consequences of knowing too much, too long. I tried to shield others from the truth of what happened, and perhaps in doing so I lost myself." Agatha nodded thoughtfully, her curiosity tempered by empathy. She observed the flicker of emotion crossing the woman's face, a mixture of regret, resignation, and lingering anxiety. It was clear that the seclusion had not been born of eccentricity alone, but of necessity and perhaps even courage. "And the village scandal?" Agatha asked, her voice low and deliberate. The woman's eyes darkened. "It is a story of betrayal, of trust broken and promises ignored," she murmured. "It touches many who still live among you though they do not speak of it. Some truths are best kept hidden, for the damage they can bring is profound." Despite the gravity, Agatha's mind remained alert, scanning details, the way the woman adjusted a photograph, the subtle ink marks in the diary, the faint scent of cinnamon in the air, and she allowed herself a small, wry smile. "Well," she said gently, "secrets have a way of escaping eventually whether one likes it or not. And here I am, politely intruding." The woman's lips curved in a slight, almost rueful acknowledgement. The conversation continued, a careful dance of revelation and discretion. Agatha gathered fragments of the story, pieces of a puzzle that included blackmail, miscommunication, and long-held fears, but many gaps remained. The woman spoke in measured phrases, revealing enough to satisfy some curiosity while leaving threads dangling tantalizingly. Agatha could feel the tension in the air, a quiet respect forming between them, both women aware that trust was delicate and earned in small increments. By the time Agatha left the sitting room to make notes in her journal, she carried not just facts, but understanding, empathy, and a renewed sense of purpose. The cottage, the woman, and the village scandal were now intertwined in her mind, each revelation sharpening her focus and deepening her resolve. And while much remained hidden, Agatha Raisin felt certain of one thing: the journey to uncover all the truths had only just begun. Agatha was mid-sentence, carefully outlining a particularly convoluted diary entry, when a sharp crash echoed from the hallway. Her heart leapt and she shot a quick glance toward the door. A man stood there now, broad-shouldered and impatient, his eyes darting over the room with predatory interest. It was Mr. Hemsley, a local troublemaker known for exploiting village scandals, and he looked far too pleased with himself. "Evening, ladies," he said, voice smooth but edged with menace. "Thought I'd drop by and see what secrets you've been hiding in this old house. Funny how news travels when it shouldn't." Agatha stiffened, mind racing. He had learned about the hidden room, or at least suspected, and he intended to capitalize on it. The woman at her side stiffened as well, her pale face betraying fear for the first time since Agatha had arrived. Quickly assessing the situation, Agatha placed herself between the intruder and the woman. "Mr. Hemsley," she said evenly, "I'm afraid you've misunderstood the nature of this visit. This is not the sort of place for gossip or opportunism." Her voice carried a quiet authority, tinged with her signature dry humor, hoping to unbalance him. Hemsley smirked, stepping closer, but Agatha was already moving. She feigned a stumble toward the fireplace, knocking over a small stack of papers with exaggerated clumsiness. The noise distracted him just long enough for the woman to slip behind a side table, unseen. Agatha seized a heavy leather-bound book and brandished it in mock defense. "Careful," she warned lightly, though her pulse was racing. "These tomes bite when provoked." The antagonist's attention faltered, and Agatha's mind clicked into action. She reached for a small lantern nearby and flicked it across the room, casting shifting shadows that caused Hemsley to hesitate. "Honestly," she murmured under her breath, "you'd think a grown man would have better balance than a ghost story." The comment, though whispered, seemed to give her the psychological edge she needed. Hemsley's expression shifted, uncertainty flickering across his face. Taking advantage of his hesitation, Agatha guided the woman to the hidden doorway behind the bookshelf. "Quickly through here," she instructed, her voice steady despite the adrenaline. The woman obeyed without question, slipping into the concealed room. Agatha followed, closing the panel just in time to hear Hemsley pounding on the wooden barrier. He muttered curses and threats, but without proof of wrongdoing he could do little more than vent his frustration. Agatha leaned against the panel, heart still racing, and allowed herself a small, wry smile. "Well, that could have gone worse," she said quietly to the woman, who peeked out from the shadows, eyes wide but grateful. The intrusion left a lingering chill, a reminder that the cottage's secrets were not entirely safe. Yet it also forged an unspoken bond between Agatha and the recluse, an acknowledgement that in moments of danger, courage, quick thinking and trust were more valuable than any diary or cryptic note. Agatha knew that, despite the immediate threat passing, the shadows around Willow Lane were only growing deeper, and the mysteries they contained were far from resolved. Chapter 7. Unraveling the Mystery. Agatha sat at her kitchen table, papers, diaries, and notes spread out around her like a battlefield of secrets. The cottage was silent, the village night holding its breath as if aware that revelations were underway. She leaned over her sketches of the Willow Lane cottage, lines connecting footprints, shadows, and cryptic annotations. Slowly, the disparate pieces of information began to align in her mind, forming a picture she had only glimpsed in fragments before. The woman's seclusion, once a source of mere curiosity, now made perfect sense. Years ago, a scandal had erupted in the village, a betrayal of trust that had harmed several families. The woman, young at the time, had been inadvertently entangled, witnessing events that some preferred to forget. She had chosen isolation not out of whim, but as a shield, both for herself and for those whose lives would be ruined if the truth came out. Each diary entry, every letter and cryptic note now carried a weight of foresight and protection. Agatha tapped her pen against her notebook, retracing timelines and cross-referencing names. Villagers who had seemed harmless, or merely gossipy, were suddenly cast in a new light. Motives, hidden grudges, and old alliances became visible threads, woven carefully into the tapestry of the village's history. She could see who might have stood to benefit from silence, and who would feel threatened by the unfolding story. The puzzle was intricate, yet it fit together with an almost satisfying symmetry. The footprints near the cottage, the locked windows, the humming late at night, all made sense now. They were measures of caution, methods of observation, and small protections for secrets too dangerous to leave exposed. Agatha realized the woman had been both guardian and prisoner of the village's hidden past, and every action she had taken over the years was deliberate, designed to maintain balance while avoiding confrontation. Even as clarity emerged, new questions bubbled to the surface. Who among the villagers might still intervene to prevent exposure? Could Mr. Hemsley's opportunism escalate into something more sinister? Agatha knew that while understanding the past brought satisfaction, it also illuminated the threats that remained. The final pieces of the puzzle were not just in the diaries or the cryptic notes. They were in the village itself, in eyes that watched, lips that whispered, and motives buried beneath polite smiles. She leaned back in her chair, letting a slow breath out as her mind traced the path forward. The woman's story was one of courage, secrecy, and unintended consequences, but it was incomplete without the right resolution. Agatha's intuition hummed insistently. Someone would try to obstruct the truth if it threatened their interests. She would need patience, subtlety, and the same careful reasoning that had guided her through the cottage, the hidden room, and the late-night threats. A smile tugged at her lips. There was exhilaration in the clarity, a thrill in seeing the tangled threads converge. She could almost hear the soft chuckle she sometimes reserved for herself, the quiet amusement at the twists and turns that had led her here. The village might have secrets, but Agatha Raisin had always excelled at uncovering them, one careful deduction at a time. By the time she gathered the materials and prepared to set her plan into motion, the picture was complete in her mind. The past was laid bare, motives mapped, and the lingering threats accounted for. What remained was execution, gentle, precise, and strategically clever. Agatha felt a surge of anticipation. The final confrontation, the resolution of years-old betrayals, and the exposure of hidden truths were within reach. And she, ever meticulous, would ensure it unfolded on her terms. The cottage was quiet, the faint glow of the evening sun filtering through the curtains, casting soft shadows across the worn floorboards. Agatha sat opposite the woman, notebook open, pen poised. There was a weight in the room, an unspoken understanding that the moment for honesty had arrived. The woman drew a deep breath, her fingers nervously tracing the edge of the table. "I suppose there's no avoiding it any longer," she murmured, voice trembling slightly. "You deserve the truth, though I doubt the village ever could have handled it." Agatha nodded gently, encouraging her without pressure. "Take your time. I'm listening," she said. Her calm tone seemed to settle the woman, allowing her shoulders to relax, if only fractionally. The woman's eyes flicked to the diaries and letters stacked neatly on the desk. "Years ago," she began, "there was an incident that changed everything. A disagreement between families escalated into betrayal, and someone paid the price in silence and secrecy. I witnessed things that no one else could, and it left me with choices I would rather not have made." She paused, as if weighing the words against some internal measure of safety. Agatha jotted down notes, careful to record details while letting the woman speak uninterrupted. Every fragment mattered: the motivations, the cover-ups, the small acts of misdirection that had allowed deception to persist. Names were mentioned, villagers whose faces were familiar, whose polite smiles now carried shades of hidden history. The woman explained how she had concealed evidence, not for personal gain, but to prevent further harm. Her isolation, her careful observation, her hidden room, all of it had been a form of guardianship, born of fear and responsibility. "There were letters, diaries, and records I kept," the woman continued, voice steadier now, "because I needed to remember, to protect anyone who might be caught in the fallout. And I suppose in doing so I also protected myself." She looked down at her hands, pale against the wooden table, and then met Agatha's eyes. "I never wanted attention. I never wanted to hurt anyone. But the truth was too heavy for ordinary life." Agatha felt a swell of empathy, recognizing the courage it had taken to maintain secrecy for so long. "You've carried a tremendous burden," she said softly. "And you've done it with dignity." The woman's lips curved in a faint, grateful smile. "Yes, but dignity is fragile," she whispered. "And now, it seems, some things must be faced whether I wish it or not." The confession continued, filling in gaps, clarifying motivations, and revealing the subtle manipulations that had kept the village unaware of the true story. Agatha absorbed it all, her mind racing yet her heart calm, feeling satisfaction at the clarity and empathy for the woman's long years of careful isolation. Even as she wrote, she recognized that not every villager would react kindly to these truths. Some wounds would sting, some reputations might tremble. By the time the woman fell silent, the room felt lighter, charged with resolution yet tempered by the awareness that the village itself might take time to catch up. Agatha closed her notebook and smiled gently. "Thank you for trusting me," she said. "The story is safe with me, and the truth, painful though it may be, will finally be understood." The woman nodded, eyes misty but serene. Agatha realized that while some village dynamics would remain complicated, the long-standing mystery had reached its heart, confessed, recorded, and finally, partially reconciled. Chapter 8: The Village Moves On. The morning sun spilled over the rooftops of Carsely, bathing the village in soft, golden light. Birds chirped energetically, and the scent of fresh bread from Mrs. Bloxby's bakery mingled with the faint aroma of dew-soaked gardens. Agatha Raisin stepped out of her cottage, inhaling deeply and savoring the rare stillness that followed weeks of whispered suspicions and late-night mysteries. For once, the village seemed almost ordinary, yet richer for the secrets now acknowledged and understood. Her first stop was the local cafe, where she found familiar faces gathered over steaming cups of tea and gossip that, while spirited, now felt harmless. Agatha shared carefully curated tidbits of her investigation with a few trusted villagers, carefully omitting the most sensitive details. She watched their reactions with quiet satisfaction. Curiosity piqued, eyes bright, but no panic or malice. Slowly, Carsely was recalibrating, settling into a rhythm that balanced awareness of the past with appreciation of the present. Even the minor eccentricities that had once seemed trivial now took on a gentle charm. Mrs. Bloxby fussed over the precise arrangement of scones on a tray, Mr. Hemsley muttered grumpily about missing tools that had been misplaced for weeks, and children darted between tables, giggling as if the weight of secrets had no hold on their small, carefree lives. Agatha allowed herself a soft chuckle, noting how the village thrived on small dramas, yet endured them with good humor. Her thoughts inevitably drifted to the woman from Willow Lane Cottage. Agatha had returned her diaries, letters, and maps, and had guided her through careful reintegration with the village. At first, the recluse had been hesitant, choosing to observe from a distance. But now, she ventured out occasionally, exchanging brief nods with neighbors, allowing her presence to be felt gently without intrusion. Agatha observed her walking down the lane one afternoon, a slight smile on her lips as she paused to admire a newly planted rose bush, and felt a quiet sense of hope. Back at her own cottage, Agatha reflected on the lessons learned. Secrets, she realized, had power, but so did courage, empathy, and patience. Even the smallest acts of kindness, like helping Mrs. Bloxby carry baskets of bread or offering an encouraging word to a nervous villager, seemed to weave a fabric of normalcy stronger than gossip or fear. The village, Agatha thought, was resilient, not despite its mysteries but because it had endured them. By midday she had wandered through the quiet streets, exchanging nods, smiles, and playful quips with familiar faces. The rhythm of life, once disrupted by shadowed cottages and hidden rooms, had returned, punctuated by laughter, smells of home-cooked meals, and the occasional curious glance at the Willow Lane Cottage, now inhabited yet no longer threatening. Agatha allowed herself to imagine a future where secrets were acknowledged but no longer dictated the village's pulse. As the sun began to dip, casting long shadows across cobblestones, Agatha settled on a bench near the central square. She sipped tea from a thermos she had brought, letting the warmth seep into her fingers and shoulders. The village moved around her, quietly, predictably, warmly. And though mysteries would inevitably arise again, she felt a deep satisfaction. The past had been understood, dangers had been mitigated, and life in Carsely had returned to its gentle, comforting rhythm. For now at least peace reigned, punctuated by laughter, small quirks, and the knowledge that both the village and its secrets could coexist, delicately balanced under Agatha Raisin's watchful eye. Agatha Raisin perched on the low garden wall of her cottage, her gaze sweeping across Carsely as the sun began its slow descent, painting the rooftops in soft hues of amber and rose. The village exuded a gentle calm now, as if breathing a collective sigh after the weeks of whispered secrets, hidden rooms and late-night confrontations. Agatha sipped her tea, letting the warmth seep into her palms and chest, and reflected on the adventure that had brought her here. Each discovery, each subtle clue, each cryptic note had led her to understanding, not just of the woman in Willow Lane, but of the threads that wove the village together. Her thoughts drifted to the recluse, the woman whose life had been cloaked in shadow and mystery. Agatha had watched her cautiously re-emerge, first as a silhouette behind the lace curtains, then stepping carefully onto the garden path, and finally venturing brief greetings to neighbors. Today Agatha noticed something different. A small window once shuttered and silent, now opened just a crack. A gentle breeze carried the faint scent of lavender, and Agatha understood the gesture: trust, invitation, and cautious reintegration. The woman was beginning to embrace the village again, allowing its rhythms and warmth to touch her carefully constructed solitude. A soft smile tugged at Agatha's lips. She felt a satisfying surge of pride and empathy. Curiosity had guided her to uncover truths, courage had carried her through moments of peril, and empathy had allowed her to navigate delicate emotions with care. The mystery was solved not simply through observation and deduction, but through understanding, the recognition of human complexity, fear, and resilience. Carsely's long-standing puzzle had revealed its heart, and Agatha had been the key that unlocked it. Yet even as closure settled, her mind was alert, ever attuned to the subtle whispers of the village. Every creaking signpost, every rustling hedge, every flicker of light behind a window hinted that adventure was never truly finished in Carsely. Agatha allowed herself a playful anticipation. Mysteries would come again, shadows would linger, and new puzzles would call her name. For a detective like her, life could never truly be ordinary, and she welcomed the unpredictability. The late afternoon air was cool, tinged with the scent of damp earth and blooming late summer flowers. Children ran along the cobbled streets, their laughter ringing across the square, while a cat darted between hedges, disappearing as quickly as it appeared. Agatha observed it all with a quiet amusement, recognizing the balance between routine and surprise that gave village life its charm. The woman from Willow Lane now walked slowly past, glancing toward Agatha with a tentative smile. It was a small gesture, yet monumental, a signal that life could move forward, that trust could be rebuilt, and that even the most secretive among them could find a place in the community. Agatha's gaze returned to the horizon, where the sun's final rays stretched like molten gold across the rolling fields. She inhaled deeply, savoring the harmony of light, scent, and sound. Her notebook rested beside her, ready for new observations, new clues, and new adventures, but for now she allowed herself a moment of quiet satisfaction. The tea in her hand was warm, the village around her vibrant yet tranquil, and the promise of future mysteries shimmered gently in the soft evening light. With a contented sigh, Agatha settled back against the garden wall, letting her eyes wander from the cottage rooftops to the distant hills. Life, she reflected, was an intricate weave of comfort, curiosity, and challenge. The village would continue to bustle with its quirks, its secrets, and its small dramas, but for tonight, it was peaceful. And Agatha Raisin, ever vigilant, ever curious, felt the cozy satisfaction of a mystery well unraveled, and the thrilling anticipation of adventures yet to come. The sun dipped below the horizon, leaving a flush of rose and gold across Carsely. Agatha took one final sip of tea, warmth radiating from the cup to her fingertips, and allowed herself a quiet smile. Tomorrow the village would wake again, ordinary yet brimming with hidden stories, and she would be ready.